Natal Joint Municipal Pension Funds have won Pension Fund of the Year for 2016 for their work in South Africa's retirement industry. It gives me great pleasure to introduce their CEO and Principal Officer, Sam Camilleri. Sam, very warm welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Good, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Are you happy about winning this award? I'm sure you are.
No, we are. It really puts us on the map, being from South Africa in a little province of Durban or KwaZulu-Natal, so yes, it does.
Why do you think you guys in particular have been picked out for this award?
I think from our travels and from different places we've been, we found that the legislative framework, particularly in Europe and even in the US, is very different than the one in South Africa. Insofar as our pensioners, for example, our accounts are fully funded, even though they're defined benefit schemes. And we're able to pay not only their full pension, but 13 checks and even 14 checks. And even last year, we gave our pensioners in the order of about 22% increase, of which 14 or 15% of that was permanent increase for perpetuity. So we're able to invest in longer term assets, whereby the legislative framework here is that you have liquidity ratios that you have to maintain, where in our case we can enter into a scheme of arrangements which takes us into a longer term horizon, more like 5 or 7, if not 10 years. So we can invest in longer term assets.
Still a big responsibility though, isn't it, to deliver for
it
those
is,
people?
and that's always a headache for us. There is this expectation now, particularly with our pensioners, that they always want that 13 check and they rely on it. And if you don't give it to them, they'll ask why. Particularly being in South Africa, they're wondering if there's something wrong or is the company not performing. So that's an issue. And so this year what we did, we gave them a permanent 13 check increase for perpetuity. So we've given it to them upfront, and the fund is still about 130% funded for our pensioners. So we've got enough money really to pay most pensioners a continuing 13 check for the rest of their lives. So it is well funded. It's been going for about 75 years.
Now, you have 3 funds that you're responsible for, right? Tell me a little bit about how each one of those was established.
Yeah, we've got 3 funds. We've got 2 defined benefit schemes. One was established some 75 years ago, and that was in the old apartheid days, and it was very much for a white member. And then we've got another one, which is the retirement fund, also a defined benefit scheme for the black members that was known as the retirement fund. That was about 50 years old. And over the years, we've tried to match the benefits as much as possible. And these days, there's very little difference between the two. In fact, the active members, even in the super fund, which was predominantly white, it's about 80% black now. So it's really blended in quite well. For the super fund, it's fully funded for the active members. For the retirement fund, we're in the high 90s, mainly because in the black workforce, the salaries have gone up twice the rate of inflation. So even though our returns have been excessive, they haven't been quite enough for the active members to keep up with that. But both the pensioner groups, we've got separate assets for them, and they're both 130% funded or thereabouts, and they've all got their 13 checks and 14 checks and special increases, so they're very happy.
Sounds like a much rosier picture than the one that we usually have conversations about here.
No, it's the complete opposite. And with defined contribution fund, which is, as everyone moved away from DB schemes into a defined, putting the risk back onto the member rather than the employer, that's also grown substantially. And in fact, the returns have also been double digits. If you gave us $1 million in 2000, that's grown to about 9.8 million today. So it's compounded very nicely. So the benefits are quite good.
Tell me about your values and how important is that those are reflected in the funds, maybe in terms of what you invest in or don't invest in?
Values-wise, it's incredibly important, but coming from South Africa, governance is critical for us. So governance plays a huge role. We prescribe to the Institute of Directors, which is the custodian of King. So we apply the fund through the King rules and ensure that we comply, and we're AAA rated in that sense. We also get audited by the Auditor General because we're a government type fund, because we have municipal workers, and we've always got a clean audit. Now, for South Africa, that's an achievement in itself. The other thing is that communication to us is important, communicating to our members, even though we're a province, but the province is the same size as England. So that's how far we have to communicate. And we've got different levels of communication. Yes, we use technology, but some of them are in the rural areas, which we can't, so we've got to use the mail network. So that's important to us. And investments, of course, paramount. So we've spent a fair bit of time analysing investments, understanding more trends, and more important, picking the right asset managers. So we try and become like a multi-manager, so we employ the best of the best, but we only have 4 domestic managers and 4 international, so we're very concentrated.
What do your members tell you, Sam, that they like about the service they're delivering? Maybe sometimes they tell you about things that they're not so happy with.
Yeah, no, we do get that.
You know, what is it, do you think, that makes that sort of bond between you and your members really flourish?
It's funny, we do measure that, and that is something that we're really proud of. You probably got here in the UK, we've got bills and legislation gone through about treating customers fairly. We've adopted that within our culture. Not only within our culture, though, we also adopted it within our remuneration network. So as part of your bonus incentive scheme, we monitor how you've treated queries, how often queries occurred, was the client satisfied. We'll go back and ring and find out all that sort of information. So treating customer fairly to us was very important, and it's become part of our culture. We won awards for it domestically, which is important, and we've given some lectures about it to other institutions like us that haven't quite adopted it.
And do you think that's because you have to really mean it? You know, if you want to put people at the centre of things, you know, it has to be really authentic.
No, but you're right. I mean, I suppose if I can relate it maybe to your mother or to your father that's receiving a pension. One, they want to be communicated. They don't want surprises, I think. And two, if they ring or they communicate with you, they want to be treated fairly. In South Africa, if you feel that you're not treated fairly, you can go to the pension fund adjudicator, which is a government entity, and complain. And you say, look, the benefits I've received weren't appropriate, or I didn't get communication. And we monitor those complaints. Even though we have 30,000 members, we have on average 4 complaints that go to the pension fund adjudicator, and we've never lost a case. So it's become an issue. They thought that they were going to get a higher benefit, or they were unhappy, and we've managed to sort those issues out. So again, that's ensuring that there is communication, a trail of communication, and keeping it up. And same with pensioners. We don't like suspending pensioners if there's no proof of life. So we try and ring them and tell them what's happened to your form, have you given it to us? And when we try and communicate with them before we just simply stop payment. But that is an issue.
Keeping it personal. Talk to me about the future. What does it hold for you guys?
Yeah, because South Africa, the Financial Services Board that controls a lot of pension funds, put out an interesting statistic last year. They're saying there's 20 billion rands worth of unclaimed funds. Now, there are 3 million people owed 20 billion worth of money. And that's an issue for the pension fund industry. And I suspect even here in the UK, where people have been contributing and then you just lose contact and you can't find them. So one of our priorities was not to be part of that statistic. So it was critical for us, even though our area is as large as the UK, let's knock ours off. So we put a task team together. We've been working on it for about 18 months. And our unclaimed now is down to about 4 million. Even though we look after 17, 18 billion worth of assets, it's only down to 4. And they're truly people we can't find. And the average is about 10,000, and it accumulates interest. And it represents less than 0.02 of our total assets. So we've brought it right there. So that is an exercise that I think is continuous for us. It is not our money. We're non-profit. So it's important we give it to the people, or to the beneficiaries, or to their children, or whoever is deserving. So we do make a concerted effort to make sure of that.
Sam, what interests you in terms of the global pension landscape? Are there things happening out there that you find interesting right now?
Look, it is. It's an ageing population. The reality is children that are born today are going to live well in excess of 100. Whether we like it or not. It's a frightening statistic. We were at a conference recently, and they were saying that the average child born today will probably live to about 107. Now that puts an enormous amount of strain on these pension funds particularly the old DB schemes, if they're not fully funded now, that is going to cause massive, massive concern. And with interest rates, particularly globally, virtually at zero, by being forced to invest in those type of assets, as the legislative framework here is, by definition then you will not be fully funded. In fact, benefits are going to be reducing in an environment where your children are living longer, you're living longer, longevity is there. So it is a real problem whereby you have to start thinking about investing for longer term assets, ones that give you a proper return, and really putting it in bonds at minus is telling you your benefits are going to be reduced.
So does that mean more generally globally the trend for funds, or depending on the regulatory environment, is going to have to be some sort of innovation? As you say, maybe it's longer term investment.
I mean, you look at Brexit now in the UK, you pick up the paper, I picked up the Financial Times the other day, and they were saying, well, there isn't going to be a lot of flow of funds here, particularly for infrastructure development, the old that used to come from abroad. Well, that's an enormous opportunity for some of the pension funds here to invest for longer term assets in infrastructure and possibly get a significantly higher return than they can get in government bonds or fixed interest type securities, because they've got long term liabilities, so they can afford to invest in longer term assets that can generate better returns. And that is something that we constantly are exploring for our funds to ensure that we get those extra returns. And it's an interesting statistic. If you can save 2%, whether through fees or excessive return, over your lifetime, you can retire on a pension 60% higher, just the power of compounding interest. So it is critical that you can try and earn that.
I was trying to explain to my 6.5-year-old the other day, who's struggling with units and numbers right now, about compound interest, because we give her pocket money and we insist that she save some of it, which she will never touch. And I was wondering if maybe that's what we need to do.
Well,
we need to inspiring in them in that way.
No, with all my children, I'm a bit older than you are. I've got some in my 30s and I've got a young one which is 15. All of them, I bought a share portfolio at approximately the age of 10. So they can understand what shares are, what are rates of return. And it's funny how different children react. Some will say, oh, can we take profit now and spend it? And others will say, why didn't we invest more? Or what else should I invest in? And I think that's important that the younger generation particularly understands this, because of longevity. Unless we extend the working life beyond the 65 barrier, you're going to be retired for 30, 40 years of no income. That means you'll need a significant amount of savings in the long term.
Well, when you think about that, that's almost potentially as long as the working portion of your life potentially.
Yeah, very much. I mean, particularly if you don't do very well at uni and you tend to repeat like some of my children from time to time, they prefer a party. The answer is yes, and it's becoming more and more competitive. In the old days, if you had a degree, you could walk into a reasonable job. These days you need an MBA and you need to work probably a 12-hour shift, and you've got to show your dedication. And to get ahead in that environment and to save significantly for 30, 40 years of retirement is a big call. So I hope the camera people here are listening, so they're saving because they're young.
So it sounds to me like people need to innovate, families need to innovate, and funds as well. Sam, thank you so much for joining us, and all the best of luck for the future.
Thank you.